Sarah from Perennial, and I'm here to show you how to decorate your pumpkins in a sustainable way in conjunction with the Best of Missouri Market for the Missouri Botanical Garden. To make this craft today, we recommend some pie pumpkins, or you could use regular pumpkins too, but pie pumpkins are a great size for this project. You'll also need burlap, toothpicks, map pins or sewing pins, a hammer and large nail, sticks, leaves, and other natural materials you can gather from your backyard, scissors, upcycled paper like old book pages, junk mail, scraps from construction paper, etc., paper punches if you have them, Elmer's glue-all if you have it, pencils, and markers. Let's begin by making some fun paper shapes to glue or pin into your pumpkin. I'm going to use some scraps of old book pages, some invitations that were extra printed, magazine pages, and old scrapbooking paper. If you have paper punches, these are really great for making fun shapes really quickly and getting lots of them. But if you don't have paper punches, you can use a good old-fashioned pair of scissors to make some shapes that you might want. If you don't have a paper punch, just grab a pair of scissors and cut some shapes out of the paper you want to work with. You can make squares really easily. You can also make lots of triangles by cutting a strip and then alternating your angles back and forth to get lots of triangle shapes. You can also use material like brown paper bag to craft with. And if you picked up a kit from Perennial, you could use the bag that your materials came in. For my pumpkin, I'd like to make it into a scarecrow pumpkin. So I'm going to start by designing with some of the paper shapes that I cut out to make some eyes, mouth, and nose. If you happen to have a bottle of Elmer's glue-all, this works great for initially sticking your paper to your pumpkin, but if you don't have it, it's not a big deal. You could use the toothpicks or map pins to adhere your pieces to your pumpkin. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of extra glue as a reinforcement. So I'm starting to get a face that I like on my pumpkin. Again, if you didn't have glue, you can just use map pins, sewing pins, thumbtacks, whatever you have at your house to stick right into the middle of this to get this onto your pumpkin. Sometimes you might have a piece that needs 2 pins on it instead of just 1. If it's extra big or it's not being pinned in the center. So I've got my eyes and my nose, and now I want to work on a mouth shape. You could do this kind of like a classic jack-o'-lantern style mouth, or you can get kind of wild with it. I have some fun scraps of paper here that I'm going to turn into the mouth. Now that I've got a face for my pumpkin, I'm going to move on to add some different decorations, and I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques for adding unique materials other than the paper we've added. If you have some toothpicks at home, toothpicks are a great compostable way to adhere different kinds of materials to your pumpkin. We cut our toothpicks in half, which you can do just by snipping with scissors, or if you have a saw at home, you can use that as well. But they cut pretty easily with a standard pair of scissors with the help from a parent. This will make them a little bit shorter to help pin materials into our pumpkin. The mat pins that we added will need to be pulled out before you compost your pumpkin, so just remember that. I'd like to introduce some leaves into my pumpkin. These are just dried-ish leaves that I gathered around my yard, and I'm going to use it to make almost like a crown around the top. What I can do is take my half toothpick that I have cut in half, pin it through my leaf, and then use something like a hammer or a mallet to push this toothpick into my pumpkin. Since that pumpkin has kind of a fleshy surface, it'll resist just a little bit, but it'll mostly go in. We don't want our toothpick to go all the way down. We want it to go in almost at an angle to help adhere this material to our pumpkin. We have a small wooden mallet that we have made, but you can also use something like a hammer for this. I'm going to do a crown of leaves all the way around the top. I want to add what looks like to be a straw hat on top of my scarecrow, so I'm going to take some burlap material, which we salvaged from old coffee bags, and I'm going to turn that into a little hat for him. To do this, I'm going to begin just by cutting a small square about 5 inches or so. If you picked up a kit from Perennial, you'll have this material in your kit. I'm going to take my shape and I'm going to start to twist it into a hat by just taking one side and curling it on the other to make almost like a cone shape. This extra little flap here we can go ahead and cut off, which when it's unfolded basically means we're cutting off a little corner of our square. Now I'm going to place this on top of that stem of the pumpkin and just get it all pinned in place. The next thing I might want to do is to add some arms or legs to my pumpkin. And we can introduce thicker natural materials like sticks, or materials like the dead heads of plants by using a hammer and nail to make a hole that we can then insert that material into. When gathering sticks, look for ones that are fallen to the ground and that have a little bit of a snap whenever you break them. That way we know they're nice and dry. You can also gather dead heads of plants like coneflowers, rudbeckias, or other native plants, which make really interesting accents for your pumpkin. So for this guy, I'm going to add some arms to him that are going to stick out like a scarecrow. So wherever I want my arm to stick out, I'm going to go ahead and take a bigger nail, get it roughly in place, and then I can use a hammer or a mallet to tap this in. I'm going to tap it in, wiggle it around just a little bit. Make sure it goes into the center of the pumpkin, but you don't want to lose your nail inside the pumpkin either. Once that hole is big enough, we'll be able to just insert your stick right into that pumpkin. We'll do the same on the other side. I'm gonna take that out so I can do the nail on the other side. And now I've got some arms for my scarecrow. If I want to make him sitting down, I could also add some little feet down here, but I think I'm pretty happy with that. In the same way that we incorporated sticks, you can also incorporate natural materials like the dead heads of plants to create some interesting natural textures on your pumpkin. So I'm going to begin using these two as my eyes this time, rather than paper like we did on the first one. And I'm going to use my hammer and nail to make 2 holes big enough for these to fit through. Sometimes you need to wiggle your nail around a little bit to make your hole bigger, or you can do 2 nail holes next to each other to make it really big. These guys can be sharp, so be careful when you're poking them in to your pumpkin. Alright, so I've got 2 different kind of crazy eyes going on here. Now I'd like to show you another technique that you can do to add eyelashes to your pumpkin. You can begin by just cutting a strip of paper that's about 1 inch wide. Doesn't need to be very long, maybe like 2 inches, 1 to 2 inches. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a fringe. So I'm going to start by cutting really thin strips, like 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch wide. I'm not going to cut all the way through. I'm going to cut almost to the edge, but leave something like 1/4 of an inch at the bottom. Do those all next to each other. So I'll have a piece that has fringe cut in it. And what I want to do is right where I stopped cutting, there's kind of a line where I stopped cutting, I'm going to bend my paper and start to curl it up to make an eyelash effect. And I'm then going to attach it to my pumpkin. Using my pins. If you don't have pins at home, you'll just need to be patient and wait for your glue to dry, which sometimes takes a minute or so. If you have burlap, you can also create some interesting haired textures by pulling apart the threads of your burlap piece. So if you start at one end and start pulling, you'll be able to separate out some of these individual threads. just a couple at a time. Now I can start to design with those hair threads that I've created. Make this pumpkin have a little bit of a shaggy hairdo. And I could simply add some glue and glue these to the top, and I could reinforce with some pins. I think for this pumpkin I'd also like to add some ears. So I'm going to start with just a circle shape that I punched out, cut it in half, and then create a fold line along that part that I cut, just like that, so that I can glue it and attach it and have it stick out from the side. So I'll just add glue along that fold. I'll stick it on and then I'll reinforce it with some toothpicks here, or pins, whatever you have. With that extra frayed material that you pulled those threads off to create hair, you could also do something with this. It would also make good eyelashes, or it could make a hat, bangs, or its own kind of shaggy hair. If you have a small hand punch at your house too, you can punch right into leaves to make small circles. I'm gonna do to add some earrings to my pumpkin. And I'm just gonna glue these on. You can also incorporate markers to add some customization to your punched paper shapes or cut paper shapes. Feel free to get really innovative with your pumpkins and use natural materials or compostable materials to make a pumpkin that could be a unicorn or a monster, or it could look like someone in your family or one of your friends. Just go wild with the materials and have fun. When you're ready to compost your pumpkin at the end of the season, be sure to pull out any old map pins before adding it to your compost bin. Thanks to everyone for joining Perennial and the Missouri Botanical Garden to learn how to make sustainable, compostable pumpkins. Hopefully we'll see you guys all soon.